Hey, sis.
Hey, sis. We
Uh,
made it, sis.
okay, we made it. On today's episode of She Blaze, Hong Kong opens its first CBD cafe. U.S. House will vote to deschedule cannabis. And this week, we take a deeper dive into the DEA's obsession with our industry.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, tell them you said obsession. Yes, we said obsession. I cannot wait to get to that section. But of course, first, we've got to kick things off with the high of the week. And I'm just excited to share mine because, of course, I always am in love with finding new, great hemp flower strains. So, my high of the week is the Feel Good Factory Lifter strain. This is a hemp strain. And of course, I am doing this strain mixed with the amazing Dank Duchess hash. This strain has about 20% CBD. I've also picked up a Hawaiian haze that had about 19% CBD. So, of course, loving the flower, but it is hemp flower mixed with a wonderful, wonderful marijuana hash.
Yeah.
What?
Okay, well, you are definitely high this week, girl. um,
Hilarious.
my high of the week, I went to the tunnel and I got some good strains. I got some strawberry cream and some sour jack. And now normally, they come in all kind of like runts and whatever bags or whatever. But this one came in just your basic bag. And when I tell you the smell was so on point, it smelled like strawberries just slapped me in my face with the strawberry cream. And strawberry coffee is my favorite strain, so I had to try it. And it definitely had me coasting, and I was creative. I was making stuff. I was like, oh, that sounds good.
Making stuff in the kitchen or making stuff like, on creative on the computer?
Both. I like
Oh.
the kitchen. I reorganized some stuff. I was doing some stuff on the computer. I was like, I'm just doing the most this week. So shout out to that strawberry cream and D on the Hill for hooking the sister up.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we've gotten a great high in the week, but of course, I'm really excited about these hot topics. You always find the tea. Let's get into them.
Okay, and the tea is hot because China, can you believe it or not, in Hong Kong is opening its first CBD cafe. Now, this is really important because ultimately we all know China has a very strict no drug policy, including THC. So the fact that they're now opening a CBD cafe lets you know that CBD is taking over worldwide. Ultimately, it's this cute little quaint pedestrian walkway cafe in Hong Kong where you will be able to have some CBD infused foods, coffee, teas. You can also get some for your pets too now.
Well, this doesn't surprise me, of course, because we've talked about China being the hemp capital of the world. Basically, we have always seen most of our CBD products coming from hemp cultivated in China. Now, granted, I am shocked here because they have such a zero THC policy, and this sort of shows a little bit of an understanding that cannabis and cannabinoids, CBD specifically, has some wellness impact. China's been able to really capitalize on being able to export, and now because of COVID, guess what? They can't export hemp as much as they were before. And so they're smart to try to figure out what to do with it. Now, once they're getting to the point where they're like, okay, this cannot have any THC, then it means that they are obviously looking to create from their hemp CBD isolates, and from that CBD isolate create product. And so that's what you're probably going to get. You're not going to get necessarily anything that's full spectrum. I'd be surprised if you see things that are broad spectrum. They maybe are learning more around the terpene medicine and medicinal benefits, but whenever someone is no THC at all, usually that means stripping the entire plant and only focusing on one molecule, which is usually an isolate. So I'm looking forward to seeing what type of products come out. You said, when do they open up the CBD?
So they open up next month. Right now, they're in a very soft launch phase. So we're not going to exactly know how it's going to do, but ultimately, everyone knows that the leading CBD isolate comes out of China. So you're right. They have to figure it out. They got to do something. And hey, this is some money moves. So
China's always making money moves, of course. They got a lot of people to feed. For real, for real. It is
listen, the
a
little
very,
song
very
about their money is
populated
real.
country. Yes, they're dominating in certain things because they make decisions based on that. And we have struggled with this at the U.S. Hemp is one of the ways that we've struggled because, like I said, despite being no THC, they are still the hemp capital of the world, and that means they're growing the most hemp in the world, and we have been prohibiting it until 2018. So this is part of the challenge.
Definitely. Well, now that we're talking about U.S. Really challenged on cannabis, let's move into our second hot topic.
All right. What's that? Oh, my goodness.
Our second hot topic might give you deja vu, sis, as the U.S. House is voting on the MORE Act. Now, as we know, the House is Democratic led, and there are a lot of people really pushing for at least decriminalization of cannabis, descheduling, getting people out of jail. That's like the number one thing they really are trying to do here. And so they're up again, and it seems like it's going to pass.
Well, that is actually one of those things where, it's bittersweet because we know it may pass here in the House. But when it gets to the Senate, just based on where things are, it doesn't seem like it will go far. And I know we've had a lot of conversation about well, why does it matter then? Why do we care? And I think at the state and the local levels, it does matter when something passes the House. It becomes something that is precedent that allows us to speak to, hey, this is a bill that the majority of the United States, because the House still has the most, that's the House of Representatives, right? So they represent almost more closely than the Senate, the voice of the people. And the voice of the people have spoken for some time. We know that more than 65-70% of U.S. Americans believe that cannabis needs to be legalized, and at the very least decriminalized and certainly descheduled. We also know that people believe there's medicinal benefit from it. And so with over 30 states that have some sort of marijuana legalization on the books, medical or adult use, it seems like it should make sense that this would be what's next. But a lot of the Senate, I don't believe they like what's in there because this is just as much a social justice bill as it is a medical expansion bill, because now we know we can do more with the cannabis plant once we do that. It's all of the things that have been inhibited as a result of prohibition.
Right. And Vice President nominee Kamala Harris actually sponsored the MORE Act, which I think is very important to acknowledge, especially as we talk more about legalization or decriminalization, descheduling on a federal level.
Yeah.
She also said that, she's going to use her persuasion to really help move the cannabis progression forward to end prohibition. Ultimately, on the MORE Act, though, it allows states to still choose how they will regulate the cannabis industry, which I think is huge. Okay. I do think based on how our political system is, it has to be the state to regulate on a real level, but the federal government has to allow some regulation, right? Mm-hmm. They have to allow some research. They have to allow it to be a little bit more accessible, especially in the South, because people in the South, honey, they don't. I get it. You got to read in between the lines on a lot of these laws, but in the South, honey, they act like they can't read at all.
Oh my
goodness. So they're also putting a 5% federal retail sales tax on marijuana products.
So of course they're coming for their money.
Okay. They was like, we heard you $1 billion industry. Give us some coin.
Well, they've been giving some coin because last year the federal government collected $1.4 billion in taxes from states. So this is really more on the books official, but they already getting money, just to be clear.
Okay, let them know. Uncle Sam always gets paid first before anything.
Yeah.
And then again, like you said, it's social justice, reinvesting that revenue into the communities that have been really compacted by the war on drugs. Yeah. And so I think it's really important, especially if you say it on the federal level, and learning about how the states actually regulate it, like, Chicago and Illinois being like, you can't live in public houses using cannabis, even though you got a medical marijuana card.
Yes. I mean, there's definitely a lot of areas that people don't consider that become impacted by the fact that it's prohibited, from child protective services to being in the hospital. A lot of people don't know you can get randomly drug tests. This is something that is common for Black and brown women, especially pregnant women, that you are getting drug tests against your will. Actually, New York City last year passed laws said that they cannot do that anymore in the hospitals, that they have to, create a protocol so that people are informed. But there are a lot of civil liberties that are essentially snatched on the basis of marijuana or smell, which we have to include hemp too, because as I'm definitely seeing from this lifter strain, hemp has terpenes as well, can be loud as well. And certainly no one really knows the difference between hemp and marijuana when you're looking and not smoking, but just looking at the flower, and you really could care less about, oh, hemp has been legalized. I think it's about taking off the shackles of the plant in totality, but also taking off the shackles of the people who are using the plant and have been doing so, regardless of 40 years of mandatory minimums, Rockefeller drug laws. Our usage rate is not at all reduced. So it's more than about time, but no pun intended. The MORE Act is certainly one that we support, and I'm definitely proud to see that it has a chance in the House. But, we also got to prepare ourselves for the reality, and that means managing expectations and recognizing that it's probably not going to go all the way. But if you are an advocate on a local level, this is something that you need to dig into and need to be pushing against. When you are talking to your local leaders, they need to know, hey, this is what has happened. And if it passes in the House, that is a win in our pocket, at least talk to.
Absolutely. You are right. Preach, pastor, preach. Like, take us to church and tell us the truth, because ultimately it is not going nowhere in the Senate, honey. And it's so close to elections too. If anything, people in the Senate should be getting nervous. You need to be sweating, because here in America, we want some decriminalization, some legalization, and access. Yes. We want to access all the products.
Yes.
Anyway, back to our really important topic where, also it's really important as we look at over the presidential elections, how some of these agencies and administrations and departments are regulating cannabis too, especially if you don't feel either one of the presidential elects really are calling to your heart. As somebody that is a younger millennial in terms of age, like none of these presidents is talking to me. They talking to y'all. I
don't think that they're talking to me either, sis. I'm not going to front. I think maybe being an architect and has made me more aware. But, one of the things that I'll just be a proponent of is, like, we don't have to necessarily choose a side, but we do have to vote. And you should be voting with an awareness of our history and what are we repeating and what are some of the cycles that we can prevent. I'm always excited to talk about ways that we can do that.
I know that's right. Well, let's move on to our hot topic number 3, where we can look at what's going on in California. We always talk junk about California. We always spill the tea about California, but this time we on California's side because the federal government is doing too much, honey. So basically, the Justice Department asked the federal court to force California marijuana regulators to disclose documents about cannabis businesses, licenses, and shipments. Now, most people don't know this. This happened while, we were on our summer break on She Blaze, but the District Court of Southern District of California says that the Drug Enforcement Administration subpoenaed documents about marijuana companies and their owners from their commission. However, they have no specified company. They have no specific CEO. They have no idea what's going on. Now, we know that California has been regulating their unregulated market heavy. So for the Justice Department to feel like they really need to shed a light onto California is very interesting.
It is. I mean, I think as always, they are target because they have such a large market. They are target because they have a large legal market. And there are a lot of companies that are, because of some of the regulatory changes, since federal, like since full legalization, adult use legalization, my bad, it has been really hard for a lot of companies. And so I think there's some of the gray area still. But nonetheless, it's sort of like, let the state handle it. And the state has been handling it. And so the DEA's focus here and demand of documents is a little bit scary because there's no case. They're just fishing. It's a fishing expedition. There's no case that they've actually built. There's nothing specific that they're looking into. We reported last season about requests of the FBI to weed maps. So we have brands that, you know, are very well known in the cannabis industry. And California has some of the largest cannabis brands. It has had some of the largest cannabis brand mergers. So I'm very curious about what they're actually looking for, to be perfectly honest. And I don't think it could be good. I'm sorry. And I do think that there is a little bit of onus on the state to do what they can to protect the businesses. One, because the businesses are they're paying taxes, and California cannabis tax revenue is quite hefty,
Okay.
a dollar amount. So, you know, I don't anticipate that the California government is actually going to readily turn over things. I suspect that they're going to fight this.
Yes. Well, that was released in July. Talking they released it because they needed the public also to get behind it, because I think people didn't really know. You know, we're hearing about all these raids, we're hearing about all these CEOs doing this, doing that, stepping down, going around, but we aren't actually hearing about what the intergovernments are doing to each other. And I feel like California had tried to do its best to regulate, but ultimately they put so many taxes on it that they just didn't make their market really viable. It's not everyone can't play, and so when everyone can't play, ain't no money up in here. Yeah. And so they like, now the Justice Department coming in and asking for stuff, and we only got these couple of big millions of companies that actually can't pay the taxes. Oh,
like we got these broke multi-million-dollar companies. No, you're right. I mean, I think it's really a little bit of a dire situation. We've got to keep an eye on California. They've had the DEA, you know, down their neck since 1996. Real talk. FBI, DEA. I think the minute that Cali has tried to make cannabis a viable revenue stream for the state, the Drug Enforcement Administration has been, you know, sniffing around. But that's also what's so exciting about just what we are about to talk about in our main topic. It's really just understanding how deeply this desire it is for the DEA to stomp out everything that is cannabis, even though we have 20 years of real businesses that have existed in California, even though we have in more recent years, at least the last 10 years, really started to see the modernization of the cannabis industry into what we now know it today. It's certainly way more sophisticated than what, you know, even we've heard on testimony from the USDA or the FBI or the FDA or the DEA. There's clear science behind it. And so it's so funny how in one breath, like last week, we talked about their interim final rule on hemp, which basically puts a lot of hemp processors and manufacturers in risk of being in possession of a federally illegal Schedule I substance. But in the same breath, separately, you know, maybe they are the cubicle right next to each other. I don't know. They're making demands on California, which is the largest market in the legal cannabis industry right now. It's in some ways it's like you're messing with marijuana and you're messing with hemp, and you're expecting what to happen. These businesses cannot thrive if the DEA poses such a threat. And I'll be real, a lot of people, they're just afraid, and they should be, you know, because that's when you all of a sudden have the SWAT team coming through your establishment, and you have millions of investment money in your equipment, in your product destroyed.
okay. Well, basically, California was like, nope, you can't have none of our information. So DA took them to court. And so the judge just ruled, siding with the DEA, that the agency's subpoena met the requirements for an enforceable request. Now, again, they are targeting cannabis business owners and companies basically with no names. They're just saying, we want to see it. Let us see it all. Let us see everything. Now, this also comes on the heels of the Attorney General William Barr being accused of directing investigations on, some major cannabis firms, mergers, for personal gain. So he's trying to look and see what they doing because he don't like them. That's why.
Okay.
Not because it's legal. He heard that they do. I mean, he might know something we don't know, but he heard they do something. So they want to look at the documents.
Well, I mean, I think that's unfortunate, especially since on the record, he hasn't said anything negative. A lot of people who are Trump supporters like to tout him as the better replacement to the previous Attorney General who is the one, who decided Cole Memo was trash. And so it just, to me, doesn't surprise me that he's sort of forward facing. He's supposed to be what? Not a risk to the cannabis industry. We all were breathing easier. And now, I think hearing these stories, it means that there are some things that are happening covertly, and we have to just be concerned about it and always just stay vigilant, because at the end of the day, I don't think, one of the things I will say, I'm not saying that this is only going to be this particular group, but we know historically, whenever there is any type of law enforcement involved, particularly as it pertains to cannabis, there's that bias, and we wind up becoming very much disproportionate impacts to the Black and brown communities. We saw that even before the full legalization in California. Most of the FBI raids and takedowns were really of Black and brown legalized medicinal marijuana businesses. So, I'm just worried about that. I'm worried about what we're looking at. Thankfully, though, if they're looking at, some of the bigger companies in cannabis too, in the California industry, that's the one benefit of the fact that, we know there are not that many Black owned. So it's like, it isn't us. But I do think there's always somehow that scapegoat, and then shit rolls downhill. And so worried about what it is that will impact us and setting precedent, because if they could do it to California, which is definitely spending ducats to fight it, trust they could go in Oklahoma, which is now thriving, and do it there, then come to the East Coast and do it there.
They are. And ultimately, there are a lot of things that's going on that we don't know about until it's over. And so basically, there is a separate legal proceeding going on right now that basically in the federal appeals court right now that denied the request from the DEA to dismiss a lawsuit challenging marijuana's current classification under federal law. Now, this is crazy because, honestly, unless you watch C-SPAN, you just don't know. You're not going to know this. They not talking about this on MSNBC, CNN, none of that. So ultimately, it's like all these things are happening with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and we are not knowing about it until it's too late. That's why we tell you to go comment on their appeals and their final rules or their thoughts of whatever policy that they couldn't really even understand the science behind, and tell them that they are tripping.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a lot of covert activity, but that's what happens at the federal level. We know from COINTELPRO, which was a FBI counterintelligence against civil rights activist groups and leaders. The history of it is not good. And I think if you're in the cannabis industry, you should definitely have a Google alert with Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, a Google alert with FBI and cannabis. These things should be set. You should be going on a regular basis to their website, searching these things, being a vocal commenter on their platforms. I think it's important to put an eye on them just as much they have on us, and just be clear that it's some things that you can fight, but you have to be prepared to do those fights. I think in a coalition format.
Right, because they watching. They watching.
Okay. They are. I mean, they watching if you protesting. Remember?
Okay, we did talk about that on season 3. Yes, we did. Why is drug enforcement looking at the faces of protesters?
Yes. And knowing the history of what has happened in past civil rights protests, this is one of the ways. Marijuana was one of the ways they were taking down, activist groups again, because everyone was consuming. Everyone is like white, black, whatever color you were, you're consuming. And it's part of sort of, I think, the times, but that was a really big tool that they used to be able to invade civil liberties and to break up civil rights movement action state by state.
Exactly. Where was they when they was marching with them guns to open the city? Where were they when, they going and mass shooting up Walmarts and stuff? Y'all need a drug enforcement agent there, okay? Not us. We chilling. And working, you mind your business.
You're right, because the truth is our usage rates are the same, so it is likely that tactic would work there too. They're probably all also smoking up before they're walking around with the guns. Who the hell knows? But they still, that's the thing about it, they support cannabis legalization as well. We're, in one way, this is a unifying moment in some ways with folks that we don't necessarily see eye to eye, because we don't believe the government should have that much control over what you do to relax and or B, medicate or make yourself more balanced, or whatever the gamut is, because cannabis can be used in so many different ways.
Well, I don't know if they smoking, the ones that shooting up places. I know they be on like Adderall and stuff, so it's like a whole different like ball field on what they are on, because I'm not on. I only do stuff from the earth. Okay,
funny, but you're right. No, that's true. We've seen a lot of that.
Add an extra chemical, I don't want it.
That's also why I always am a little bit like side eye on isolates, because at the end of the day, it means I have to trust that you really do understand manufacturing and you're giving me the purest of content. And, we found that is not necessarily the case, which, by the way, gives me an opportunity just to quickly plug that folks still have to make sure that they are going to these sites to comment, because you don't want to have the federal government creating situations where pharmaceuticals can basically take over the market and only give us isolate versions of cannabinoid medicinal products.
Especially since the FDA released all that information about clinical research. So that's going to be important. We need to understand for real, like long-term scientific standpoint, isolate versus whole plant, and what it does, what's it best used for as well.
Absolutely. But I guarantee we're not going to get there as long as the DEA is basically doing I guess they're making us distracted, right? There's a focus point. When we get real focused, we can do it, and we made some strides. But these are the moments where they're like, oh, maybe making too many strides, and now it's a distraction. California is looking to consolidate all of their cannabis regulatory agencies into one. California is still trying to fix the mistakes that it made in the past. And these are the type of things that, again, I don't know if they're in the cubicle over, but that stress does bleed into the agencies. I know just from the role that I play that if all of a sudden that became a public records request, that's a lot of time for the team. And so I think that there's a lot at stake when you are going after the quote unquote biggest market. It's like, if we allow them to fail, we already know that we failed the other smaller markets that are just coming online.
Hello. Well, now that we're talking about the DEA, I really think we got to get into some of this history. So let's head to our main topic and really dive and dig deep dive up into the DEA, because I got some questions, and I know a lot of things happened before I was even a twinkle of anything. So let's get into it.
A lot of things happened before we all were a twinkle of anything. And I think that's part of the challenge, is like history gets lost. There was really a great job in, I guess one would say, whitewashing the history of it. But it has been something that I've had to take a step back and relearn over the last 4 or 5 years, and then turn around and teach other people, So I'm always excited to talk a little bit about the history, because I think it'll make a lot more sense as to why we are here here? Because things are ingrained and it becomes part of a culture. So why does the DEA have a culture of obsession with cannabis, a culture of oppression of cannabis? Well, let's start with the history. I have to take it all the way back to the 1930s. I'm sure we could go even further back, but let's just lay the foundation. Slaves grew hemp. Slaves grew hemp more than they grew cotton or picked cotton, right? But yet our stories talk about cotton picking. Our stories talk about the plantations, and that's what we got depicted. Very rarely did I hear anything in history or talk about hemp. I don't remember even hearing that word. Maybe the first time was probably when I got to college. And so going all the way there, having learned all about American history, at no point did I learn about the importance of the hemp crop in American history. It was the cash crop of the 1800s. Cash crop, y'all. But at the same time, there had been an emergence of newer materials, cotton, paper, plastics, and those were the big money guys. They were the equivalent of tobacco and pharmaceutical, right? And prison, right? So it's like we got our current big money industries, but back then it was those emerging industries, and they were buddies. Those leaders, they were buddies with Richard Anslinger. He essentially is, like, I feel like the father of all of this reefer madness nonsense that we've all ingested decades after decades, generations after generations. He's the reason why we all feel bad about cannabis consumption in some ways. He was a mastermind behind purposely demonizing marijuana, while at the same time putting hemp into that, and that also suppressing hemp as the cash crop for these other industries of plastic, paper, cotton to, come to life. Our shirts and all of these things that this is all a result of that ability to demonize one thing that was foreign, marijuana, and at the same time knowing that they were related, be able to suppress that growth of that other plant. And so, he was essentially the head of what is now the DEA. So if he's the forefather of the DEA and also the constructor of all of these lies that we now believe about cannabis, I think it's impossible again to be surprised that the DEA all of these years later are still obsessed with some sort of just oppression of cannabis growth. But then every president learned from that. And so I'm going to pass the mic because that Nixon started to really put this vision of propaganda. He did movies and things like that. Anslinger, and it was Harry Anslinger, not Richard. I apologize. But, Anslinger is a very uncommon last name. Google it. But he put into place more visuals and storytelling, not as much law. And then when Richard Nixon became the president, then the law started to be where we really are losing the war on drugs, if you will.
Right. So imagine that's almost over 100 years ago at this point, close to it. Now we just rewind up to 40 years ago, and basically it got worse. It didn't get better. And ultimately, the Controlled Substance Act was birthed in the 70s under President Richard Nixon. And it then created the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, to enforce the act, just that act alone. That was the administration was created for one act.
Yep.
And to enforce that. And it was tasked with combating drug trafficking and distribution in the USA. Well, it also created a scheduling system for drugs at this time as well, which is really important because this scheduling system for drugs was based on medical value to a potential abuse. Which one is it benefiting you medically and has a high ability to make you abuse it and really get addicted, or is it just medicinal? Well, they scheduled it from 1 to 5, and 1 being the worst of the worst. This is no medical value, mad addictive, you go crazy.
Right.
And then 5 is oh, you could buy, show your ID. You could buy that at the drugstore.
Right.
Well, Schedule 1 has some drugs like cannabis, THC, peyote, heroin, LSD, shrooms, all the good natural stuff that God gives to help you. And then you have things on Schedule 2 like cocaine, methamphetamine. Schedule 5 is more like Robitussin with 90 milligrams of codeine. Like there's a bunch of like just basic cough drops, like
Right.
cough things. Those things get you high as the dickens, but you could get that at the over-the-counter drugstore, which is more like Schedule 5.
Wow. Wow. Well, one thing you just pointed out that I want to make sure we are really clear on, that the DEA was established solely to enforce this act that was the Controlled Substance Act, or the CSA we call it. And what's interesting is basically what that tells me is now I know why they're obsessed, because they're trying to keep their job. At the end of the day, I'm being real. If marijuana is atop the Schedule 1 and the whole reason for being is to enforce this act, then yeah, you've got to keep demonizing your number one product that allows you to keep your work. I mean, because not for nothing, I don't know too many houses and doors that have been kicked in because they're looking for shrooms or they're looking for LSD. I'm being real. Now, those things, I don't know if they belong on Schedule 1 either, but it has been largely marijuana that has been this, tool, because so many people are using it non-addictively, right? And what's so sad is so many people are using it for medicinal reasons. The federal government has a patent, and they understand there's a medical benefit, but yet this is still being placed in that category. And so this is where, all those lawsuits come into play, where we're like, wait a minute, the DEA is basically playing us. The government knows, you talking to that agency, that they got a patent. So why are you still saying there's no medicinal value? At the very least, even though we don't want this, we know for sure it has more medicinal value than cocaine and meth. So
okay, meth don't do nothing but give you craters in your face and no teeth in your mouth.
And potentially leukemia and death, right? Like there's a list of it. We still have no death on the record.
Right.
Cannabis.
And maybe they aren't talking to each other, right? Maybe the patented cannabis is not talking to the DEA. So one of them got to lose their jobs too. Like, if you're not doing your job communicating with your other administrations, then why you even here, bruh? And you're right. They are trying to keep their job. And it makes you wonder, who is in control of the DEA? Like, who is the one that says go? Well, just so you know, it is headed by an administrator appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. And it rolls up all under the Attorney General.
Wow. So it's all connected.
All connected. It's like those little circles that like move within each other all the time. Mm-hmm. That they're not talking about the other stuff, but they're talking about this.
But this is also where checks and balance is supposed to be in play, but why we have to consistently say, hey, who we vote for is really important, because who's in that presidential seat is the person who gets to decide who's even up for consideration. And then that same, as we talk about Republican dominated Senate, is the next that gets to say, okay, they're confirmed. That gives a little bit of a stopping. But again, if that's all in alignment, those things mean that a person that we may not want could be walked right through all the way into a role where they have a lot of power to make the cannabis industry really fall apart as we know it and as we would like to grow it. You know what I mean? Our vision of it, those things like the MORE Act, those are the things that I feel like are being cock-blocked a bit by these type of activities. But it makes total sense right now, again, that we keep going back to why they obsessed still now, today, with California. We just talked about them demanding documents from California. And it's because, again, this is ingrained in the history, almost 100 years, 40 years of only having a job solely to enforce this act, essentially, and not having any of those, other drugs, peyote, heroin, maybe heroin, but LSD or shrooms, not having a lot to do around that. I think heroin certainly keeps them busy too, as it probably should. But cannabis is atop the list, the majority of the work, period.
Well, how we having this whole opioid epidemic? It's like everybody dying on opioids. No one dying on cannabis. And so, it's like y'all trying to enforce us. Y'all doctors is doing whatever with the dang on pills.
Right. This is true. This is true. I mean, but also we are doing whatever with the pill. And what I think we're not recognizing is that we're getting prescriptions, and that gives more access to youth to these type of things before they're fully ready. And yet we're still concerned about cannabis access and to youth. And there's a lot of hypocrisy here. And I think it's important for us to lead with science, and at the same time really work within the constructs that we're given, and hope that science starts to build or break open some of those constructs, because a lot of this is still based on fear.
Well, their obsession has turned into a program. So the Domestic Cannabis Eradication / Suppression Program is long, is a mouthful, it's a lot. It's a lot. They doing a lot just only on cannabis. I know the cannabis plant does a lot, but dang, this program, y'all need a better title.
So wait, I'm sorry, I got to take a pause for a second, because you were basically saying there is a whole entire program with dedicated dollars within the DEA to eradicate or suppress cannabis. It's called the Cannabis Eradication Suppression Program. So they don't even be lying to us. They call it what they want to do.
No, but sometimes they use the little acronyms, the DCESPSLR. Like, yeah, I do not need y'all abbreviations like that. Like, half of y'all didn't even go to college for all that. So the Eradicate Cannabis Program has been given billions of dollars over the years. Now, this started in 1979, wow. And it was really just being funded to directly target Hawaii and guess what? California. And so the program, it expanded so quickly. By 1982, they had 25 states, and by 1985, child, they had the whole country.
Wow.
So basically, the DEA works in conjunction with local and state law enforcement to go in and find those cannabis plants, those indoor grows, those markets, those distributions, and stomp it out, to eradicate it, to suppress it, to hurt the market, the unregulated market that gives you your medicine, even in the South. They go in and work with them. And it's so crazy because they still getting mad money now to this day. Like in 2019, they released a report where, honey, California was at the top of every list. There was not one list that California was in top of. What's even more interesting is Kentucky is mentioned a few times too.
Kentucky is the capital of the country.
Right. Exactly. But also it's like, how many people really look like us in Kentucky and going to jail like us in Kentucky?
Quite a bit. So you're right. A low percentage of the population in total, but a high, one of the highest percentages of Black and brown incarcerated in Kentucky, and probably for growing hemp.
Okay, not even knowing, hemp growing naturally. It's a tree in your backyard that you did not mess with. You was just, you just let the earth water it. It's growing naturally. Like what I'm supposed to put pesticides on the dang tree that grow naturally in my yard?
Yes, you are. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying. I think it's really interesting that they have a program. I'm still stuck on that. I'm sorry. I know I probably shouldn't be, but surprised, like I said, because Anslinger is the godfather of the DEA. But the fact of the matter is that these are the type of things that should have gone away when the Cole Memo was taken in 2011 into enactment. Like we shouldn't actually be dealing with the DEA having a program that still exists on the books about eradication and suppression. And what scares me, and this is why we have to continue to be advocates on the ground in all states, what scares me is that some of these MSOs get into bed with our government as it pertains to trying to quote unquote eradicate their competitors, which is in the legacy market. And so we are actually doing damage to our own selves, to our consumer market, by participating in this hyper criminalization, over policing of the new legacy market, which is basically like Cali legalized, so decriminalized. So I should be able to hold my flower whenever. But the fact is that MSOs are so concerned about making money, cornering the market, that they're helping in some cases. And yet at the same time recognize they're still got targets on their back. And I think that that's part of the chess game. While we pressure California to tell us everything you've been doing and it probably ain't been right, guess what? We also talking to you in another unit to see what we can do to work together to stomp out the legacy market or the legal market. It's crazy. And then imagine if you get caught doing something dirty, how helpful then do you think you would be to eliminate the legacy market, especially when you were one of the brands that was operating both in the legal market and the gray market? Don't let me tell you what the chessboard looks like. I mean,
they making up their own board. That's the problem. Y'all, how y'all shit fall off the back of the truck, but y'all snitching on y'all boys across the street. Like, what?
Well, that's what happened. I mean, let's be honest. These are people who are probably thinking that at the worst, they would be like a slap on the wrist, fine, white collar crime. And when you got DEA poking around, what they do is they set up a situation where now they can put pressure on you. They have leverage. They have the ability to say, leaning in and say, hey, we know you was doing something that was a little double-sided. Cali knows it too, but they're figuring out. Cali's like, you know what? We'll take that paper. We're going to give you a fine. You don't need to go to jail. We've decided it's decriminalized. DEA says, guess what? We eradicated it. So that means we can lock you up. But guess what? We won't lock you up if you tell us who you're working with outside. So that's real. That's a real strategy. That's something we got to be very vigilant about. We've also got to hold these MSOs, these bigger associations, National Cannabis Industry Association, hold their feet to the fire on not supporting this type of backhanded activity. And what that means is also having more integrity as big companies in the industry. If you decided you're going to be in the legal industry, be in the legal industry and do what you need to do to get that legacy consumer to cross over into the market. That oftentimes meaning taking a legacy owner as a partner in a way that is fair so that that can go with them, right? So that consumer comes with them. But instead, you'd rather arrest that person thinking you're stomping out your competition, but yet still surprised that nobody's coming in to get your dry ass weed.
That still fall off the back of the truck.
Exactly. And the only place you could sell it is someplace off in Montana and Idaho where we got that Cali good when we, they don't know no better.
Right. And it just turns into ash.
Yes. Literally dust.
Okay. Don't even gotta grind it.
No, you don't. It really can go.
Your sticky finger's already there. You don't need that else. Oh my goodness, but for real though, and ultimately there are ways to really put the DEA in its place, because we're not saying that we don't need the DEA. We're just saying that the DEA got more important things to worry about, like the opioid crisis in America, than what cannabis is doing to help the medical care system that is already boo-boo magoo too.
That's true.
So ultimately, when we think about the DEA, it does come into play. Who do you want to be your president? Because they do put in place really who they want to be in control of the DEA. And it's also really smart to think about your Senate, because guess what? They swear them in. Mm-hmm. They say, okay, this is who you want. All right, come on in and say these words.
Yes.
And what the DEA could do, even if there's no real decriminalization, even if there's no real federal move on legalization for cannabis, the two things it really can do is, really reclassify it on the scheduled list, really allow it to go down on a lower class, something like a over-the-counter, and to allow the states to come up with their own rules. So if California is managing its regulated market, even if it's a hot mess, don't poke your nose where your nose don't belong. Mind your business and go worry about these opioids.
Right. You ain't never lie when it comes to that. I definitely think that is also important. People act like, the DEA has their hands tied. They don't. At any point, the person in charge could say, hey, we need to reschedule. That can be done without federal legalization. That can be done without the MORE Act. The MORE Act is basically forcing them to do it. That's what that is. You know what I mean? But at any point, the DEA could say, you know what? All of that stuff about the patent at least lets us know it's not not a Schedule 1, right? Now, here's the reason we should be concerned and we don't want other schedules is because that's the area where only the pharmaceutical industry or those higher, larger consumer product companies really play. There's no mom and pop at Schedule 5, right? That's not happening. And so completely descheduling versus rescheduling is also something they can do at their discretion. That's part of why they were formed. But again, who wants to give away their number one revenue driver?
Right.
What's going to happen with the cannabis eradication and suppression program if you deschedule it? You got to close that program down. Then what happens? Those people, they get reassigned, perhaps, or like everywhere else in the country because of COVID, they might have to shut down a program or they might have to downsize. This is what I mean by them trying to save their job, because it doesn't make sense on a P&L. I'm again a businesswoman. I'm looking at the business of the agency. That is their number one driver of revenue. That's how they go send people out to work. So what they're doing is, I've got to believe, is they've got to be working to figure out what's going to replace that. And you have a couple of ideas. Certainly, we do have an opioid crisis, but guess what? There's a lot of people believe the DEA needs to be completely eradicated themselves, because there are people who do not believe that drugs should be a reason, drug use should be a reason for incarceration. So I'm definitely, I don't know. I guess I am constantly vigilant because I'm aware of the type of chess moves that are being made. And I'm glad we have this platform so we can at least share with people the chess moves that are being made and they can make it accordingly.
Hello. And flip phone generation is still in a lot of the lawmaking positions, which is the problem, right? Like these programs are like over 40, 50 years old. No offense, but you're not using a 40-year-old computer. You're not using a 30-year-old computer. You using the latest, the newest, the whatever that can do anything. So ultimately, I just feel like, yes, it needs to be new programming. It needs to be a new administration. Like this administration maybe don't need to even be focused on drugs. Maybe we need to be focused on rehab. Like there are so many other things that we could be doing without the DEA, even administration and government. But it takes progress. It takes progression. At the end of the day, we let you know this is a old administration, and there's so many other ways to make money for the government that you don't even got to do this like that. So really, y'all should be checking this out and listening to us all the time, because we got a lot of ideas, and weigh this heavily when you are making your decisions. Not for nothing, there are a lot of old people running for some positions now.
We don't have choice.
If they can't use Facebook, Instagram, they can't even figure it out for a second, then they probably should not be making our laws and running our administration, people. That is really what I'm saying. Right. They can't use their iPhone.
But you know what? That's why it's always good and encouraging people to do what I've done and do what we've done, is be a part of it. If you don't like what you're seeing, utilize your skill to start to impact the industry. There's ways you can work for the DEA. We don't have to eradicate it from the outside. We can certainly eradicate the culture of cannabis oppression within the DEA and maybe build a culture that's different, the culture that's focused on some of the more ridiculous, egregious drugs in the market. Or let's focus on the pharmaceutical industry and what they're doing and whether or not that's actually benefiting consumers. Turn your focus somewhere else. But you making the face because you're probably right. That's not something that they're going to do. But I also think you don't know. And if you're a change agent like me and you don't mind taking that risk, then this is a place that you can probably find a way to be a leading voice in some of the change.
Hello. Like I said, the people that's making the laws right now, they old. They don't know what they doing. So at least try to get somebody a little bit more youthful, a little bit more progressive, even if you have different type of views, try to get somebody that knows how to use the phone. Like, Dasheeda be teaching me some stuff. Somebody in that age range, like our president before this was in his 40s, honey. He could use a phone. He could wear a suit. He could do all that.
You are
So,
hilarious.
I mean, he be making playlists and book lists, and
I believe in diversity, so I don't want to be an ageist completely, but I think that you're right. One of the challenges we have is there isn't a lack of diversity, and that's what AOC kind of pointed out when she ran. Basically, it was like we have a lot of old, rich white men running our government. And so, are we surprised at the conservative nature in which it's run on certain things, and in some ways, the shameful way, a shameless way, we are still racially biased in how we approach things, and it's based on the fact that we literally have very little diversity in our government, no matter how diverse our population is. I'm excited to see that start to shift a bit, but that's why I'm encouraging people like, yo, you want to work?
I'm not an ageist, but I do believe in retirement age. You done served and gave us all your life. All your life you done fought. Go ahead and retire and sit down. Enjoy your fruits of your labor, baby, because you can't take it to wherever you're going after this. And that's all I'm saying. You know, I believe in a retirement age. Yes, at some point there is. I'm not saying that you can't be, you know, you can't do all things, but a lot of the laws and things that we had before is because people weren't living to these ages. Now they are, and now you can see the fruits of your labor, baby. No, if you are 70 something and older, with my generation, you get into a point where it's time to retire. We're gonna try to figure out this social security stuff so rely on. But no, you should not be working at 70. You should not be laws at 70.
I think I could not agree with you more. There is a point of retirement, and a lot of the time, like the person that AOC was running against, somebody is uncontested for 14 years. You know how many districts, how many areas in government that is the case, that literally some old white man has been in position uncontested for decades, and that's where the problem is. So if you want to work for the DEA, I would have, not you specifically, Ice, but you, meaning that age, I am pushing forward. I think that we need more people who understand science. You work for the Drug Enforcement Agency. It should not be just because you are into law enforcement. You might want to know a little bit about the drugs that you're actually going to pick up. You might not want to be learning the street science version of it. You might want to know some real science. So I'm encouraging folks. And if I was back young again, leaving Princeton with a molecular biology degree, you best believe that I'd be ready to suit on up and have to figure out what I'm going to do on the inside. Now, damn well, I would have to be using cannabis to make sure I was sane every day. But trust, I would be fighting that good fight. And that's what's necessary. And that's all I was sharing. But you're right. We need more youthful voices. And sometimes it's not always about burning down the building, though, you know, there's reasons for that. There's also a point of coming in and taking the building by storm. And that's where I think we do a good job really empowering people to take that voice, take your expertise, take your experience, take your whatever your credentials are, and go and let's start participating as opposed to just hating from the outside, because that's the real way that you start to create change. They won't be ready if they're, honey, when you in your 40s and you're running for something, because I believe that, Ice, they will not be ready, but I will be able to look back in my 60s and be like, I told you that this one was the right one. So this is what
we're not playing with them, okay? And I agree. Thank you for dropping these jewels as always. Go into the system, change it. You have to change it from the inside so it can work on the outside. And so thank you so much, Dasheeda, for joining us. So let the people know where they can find you.
Yes, always so fun. You can find us every week here live, of course, but you can find me on Instagram and on Twitter. I'm at Dasheeda Dawson. Follow your girl. And of course, I'm here on Facebook, facebook.com/The WeedHead, because I'm the WeedHead, and you can check us out at theweedhead.com.
Yes, ma'am. And you are always so busy. You got a bunch of panels this week. Oh, you know, it's nowhere in the world as WeedHead because we all coming from the couch, baby. But you are going to be on so many different platforms and panels. So definitely when you're following her, check those out. See which ones you want to join. A lot of them are either free to low cost.
Actually, this gives me an opportunity because I'm so excited about NECAN because She Blaze is going to be hosting our first panel together. It's all sisters, me, you, plus we add Imani, and we are helping people get their civic life. That is September 14th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. But they have a whole lineup, and even if it's you just getting the ticket just to see us, come see us. It's going to be a fun time. It's essentially going to be like you are getting to come into a She Blaze episode, but we are going to help people get their civic life because this is what we do. We got to get people excited about participating in government and helping to change what has been a lot wrong for a long time.
Yes. And yes, ma'am. So I'm super excited. I actually have a lot to work on this weekend. So we definitely got to jump off. So make sure you're listening to She Blaze anytime on SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcast. Woo-hoo. And you can watch us on YouTube. We everywhere, honey. So check us out at theweedhead.com and follow us on Instagram at She Blaze.
Hey, well, have a great week, sis. Bye, sis.
Bye, sis.